Every patch, practically without fail, we as a player base will receive survey results from Lucky Bancho, which provides information on the rising and falling active player count, as well as interaction rates for newly released pieces of content. We are about to get Dawntrail's final patch, 7.5 in just over a week, and while 7.4 was very positively received by many who were already logging into the game on a regular basis, me included, the question that stands is whether it did enough to bring people back into the fold who may have fallen out of love with Square Enix's MMORPG for whatever reason. Has the hype cycle well and truly kicked in, or is that as of yet unclear? I always find these things really interesting, and whilst a lot of people love to use these as a way to either doom and gloom about the game, or to argue that instead it should be completely immune to any kind of criticism, I find it quite interesting to see the trends that you can clearly track, and also when any weird outliers occur, which does happen occasionally. Before we take a proper look, I do have to give a bit of a disclaimer. This is a fan-made census and isn't official in any way, and because of that, the numbers won't be 100% entirely accurate. It's generally put together based on player achievement data, and because of privacy settings and some back-end strangeness, you're always going to run into cases where a percentage are not properly counted. And there's more on top of that, which I'll talk about a bit later. Statistics will usually be projections at first before they're fully confirmed a little later down the road as well, so the numbers might shift a tad over time. So here's the chart, with information up to date for April 19th, 2026, just a couple of days ago at the time that I'm posting this. You can check for specific values, but we're going to look to the nearest 10,000 just to make things a bit easier. As of right now, we are seeing a rough active global player count of 770,000 players. Active characters are defined as characters whose most recently updated gear set includes upwards of item level 700, which means they're in Dawntrail endgame, or where experience points have changed since the previous survey, which was 2.5 months ago, something like that. When patch 7.3 released, that number sat somewhere around 880k, and when the first patch 7.4 census was taken much earlier in patch 7.4, that active player count sat at around 930k. So that's about 150-160k reduction from the start of the patch, roughly. So whilst, of course, these numbers have reduced, it isn't really unexpected that this has happened. Firstly, early patch shifting into late patch will, without fail, affect player counts in a downward trend, as users resubscribe to play the new content or release of a new update, and slowly taper off over the subsequent months before returning with the next major installment that interests them. This has happened here too, as we can see from the dipping player numbers coming out of early 7.4 into what is now late 7.4. A 100,000 plus player dip is around the norm, honestly. Another thing we have to factor in now as well, more so than ever before, is the fact that, unfortunately, Lucky Bancho is less accurate than ever in today's version of FF14, as the game has become more global, adding official Korean servers and Chinese servers that work on a totally separate infrastructure and thus are not tracked by this survey. It has become clear that really, we're only witnessing a slice of the global player base pie. Some of this player loss, especially on the Japanese data centers, will be some of those players converting over to their own local servers permanently, and unless we're able to aggregate the full data from that spectrum of regional hubs as well as what we already have, we're never going to see it properly reflected here. It's a weird state, all things told. I mentioned this last time, but there was a free login campaign during the period of the previous census as well, taking place from January to February 9th, and if those players returned and fulfilled the requirements of the Lucky Bancho census, they would have been counted amongst the returners as well, inflating the numbers on the previous survey, which obviously makes this one look a bit lower. Attrition hasn't necessarily been reverted entirely, but it seems like it's flattened out. In summary, these numbers are nowhere near as concerning as they might seem on first glance. Materia, representing OCE, is of course the smallest of the four regions, and as of the most recent census is close to dipping below the 10,000 active player count. I'm sure they'll shoot back upwards in the coming weeks though. You could argue that even patches are larger in terms of player excitement on average, thanks to the implementation of a new normal and savage raid tier, as well as the raising of the item level cap for players to work towards. So now we're out of the woods of the boon that provides. As I read further, I am expecting to see numbers dipping somewhat across the board. One thing of note is that similarly, I am expecting the next census to see a massive spike, because patch 7.5 is arguably the most content-dense patch we have ever had in the game aside from expansion launches. There is a lot of hotly anticipated things coming out here, including the second zone of Occult Crescent, Beastmaster, and the finale of the FF11 Collaboration Alliance raid. New characters sit a little above the 40,000 mark, reduced from the roughly 60k that were the case a few months ago in February. One thing that is really important to note about new players is that they aren't really new, and that there is a subset of new and free trial player that is not counted by the census at all. These players are those that have reached Shadowbringers, so they need to have invested a decent amount of time to be counted. Returning players sit somewhere around the 85k mark, a sharp dip from the previous early 7.4 tally, which was over 200,000. Now, Lucky Bancho themselves have made a note of a couple of important factors as well, including this quote that I'm going to read. There was a big movement outside the game, mainly in the Twitter player community. The former Final Fantasy XIV summary blog, which has been the centre of information dissemination in the Japanese player community since the early days of FF14, was closed as a result of the official response to personal attacks on management staff. You might remember this controversy from a couple of months back. If I'm being totally honest, I completely forgot about it, but this could definitely in part contribute to at least a shift in the mentality of certain Japanese player demographics. But they also comment specifically on the active player counts, doubling down on a trend that I believe has become more and more standard for a significant percentage of FF14 players in more recent expansions. That being the habit of returning to the game with an update, staying for a month, and then leaving until the next version, rather than sticking it out all the way through. In the current state of the world and the diabolical cost of living crisis many countries are suffering, being prudent with your limited income only makes sense. Lucky Bancho says that while the core group of continuing players remained stable, of the 210,000 who returned last time, many went inactive again, with only about 60,000 returning this time, a net decrease of roughly 150k. Strictly speaking, not all previously returning players became inactive, and some continuing players may also have stopped, so this is just a rough scale. Part of the reason may be that the previous survey covered about 2.5 months due to the delayed launch of Savage Raids, whereas this time the period was shorter at just under 2 months. However, it seems there wasn't enough content to retain players who came back for a major patch. Variant dungeons likely were not strong enough in that regard. That said, the variant dungeon itself has been very well received. In the next survey, we'll see changes after the 7.5 release, so it's not hard to imagine the number of active players increasing again. The released trailer looks promising, and the keynote at FanFest will likely generate excitement around the next expansion. Still, it would be ideal to see a gradual increase in the core player base that continues playing consistently. To achieve that, we can only hope that the Fan Festival starting this coming weekend delivers something impactful enough to attract not only current players, but also new and returning players to FF14. Based on the achievement character statistics as well, the downward trend seen since Endwalker may now be described as bottoming out or leveling off. But this survey also includes a little tidbit of information in regards to the clear rates for both Arcadian Heavyweight Savage, as well as the new Criterion Dungeon and Other Merchant's Tale. Both of these raids received a mostly glowing review from those that progged and defeated it, praising the former for its originality and fun execution-based mechanics, and the latter for continuing on the high level of quality that Endwalker's Criterions delivered. Some were very much not fans of Heavyweight's third fight, especially though, thanks to the Tyrant's execution requirement that felt like a wall for less optimal players. Despite that, clear rates of Arcadian Heavyweight are higher than that of Cruiserweight, and slightly below that of Light Heavyweight. You could extrapolate from this that the second tier of Dawntrail was the hardest overall, and that would definitely track with the average experience in previous expansions as well. The Tyrant was not as much of a wall as many initially claimed. Similarly, clear rates of the new Criterion track a bit higher than the Endwalker iterations. I think this speaks to a small shift in player mentality from Endwalker to Dawntrail. Raids have changed in their design ideology, aiming to become easier to understand and make the challenge more straightforward. Higher clear rates on average have directly followed. It seems that raiding is slowly but surely becoming more and more a part of the FF14 player's diet, and to me, this is nothing but good. Really, overall nothing here sticks out as too unexpected. The FanFest takes place in a week, and the onus is really going to be on Square Enix here to smash it out of the park. But I feel recently they've mostly done decent work on keeping the game chugging away healthily, despite the setbacks of the past few years.